everyone, and welcome back to Final Fantasy, a retrospective journey with the Professor. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at the Secret of Mana. Now, I know what you're probably saying right now. What does this have to do with Final Fantasy? Well, if you bear with me for just a moment, everything will be clear. Secret of Mana was originally released as Seiken Densetsu 2 in Japan. The story follows a young man who comes across a rusty sword after falling off a log on a cliff, and when he pulls this sword from the stone that it is in, all hell ends up breaking loose, and a previously sealed evil is released, and the power of mana across the world begins to wane, which causes the mana tree itself to wither. If he and his two friends, a princess and a sprite, can't restore mana to the world, it will be destroyed. Secret of Mana quickly became one of the most celebrated video games to ever be released for the Super Nintendo due to the controls, soundtrack, art style, and the storyline itself. The only real complaint I myself have is the simplicity of the final boss itself. The Mana Dragon is truly one of the biggest letdowns and disappointments in video game history as far as I am concerned. Now, let me explain to you why this is all very relevant to Final Fantasy. The Seiken Densetsu series actually started on the Gameboy, though when it released in the European countries it was known as Mystic Quest. Not to be confused with this horrible polished shit right here. We'll get to this one later. And in America, it was released as the Final Fantasy Adventure. Now, the playstyle itself can be easily compared to the Legend of Zelda series, and to fans who started playing after Secret of Mana itself, this will be a very easy game to pick up and enjoy. You are free to walk around the world and slice anything that comes across your path with a truly real-time battle system. One difference that fans who played Mana first will notice is the missing cooldown phase that was on the Super Nintendo sequel, though this is a good thing if you ask me. There really isn't much to say about the gameplay other than how tight the controls are and that the system is very straightforward. So we're going to go ahead and look at the story behind Final Fantasy Adventure. The story follows an unnamed man who is employed, though enslaved would be a better term, as a gladiator. This young man eventually decides to escape from his place of employment just to come across a man named Julius speaking with his Lord and Master, who is known as Dark Lord. Yes, that is his name, which once again proves that back in the day, game writers were not very creative or original with character names. The young gladiator overhears them discussing plans to take control of mana, which would allow them to place a stronghold on the entire world. Our heroes eventually found out and chased to a waterfall and falls, causing Julius and Dark Lord to assume him as dead, though he obviously ends up surviving and begins to flee to determine what should be done. Shortly afterwards, he comes across a young lady who is being attacked and saves her. The gladiator and the young lady then begin a quest to find items that will grant them the power to fight Julius and Dark Lord and eventually end up saving the world. The story continues and tells the history of the creation behind the Mana Tree and the creation of the Gimna Knights themselves, which are spoken of in Secret of Mana. The size and grandeur of this game is one of the items that still gets it praise to this day. As a matter of fact, IGN gave the game a 9 out of 10 in a retro review. The biggest issue that was stated was the poorly written dialogue, which is something that I have to agree to as well. Now, the music, however, is not something to complain about in the least bit. The soundtrack was mostly composed by Kenji Ito, who is well known for his works as the primary composer for the Mana series and the Saga series. Though there is one song in particular that I need to point out, titled Chocobo Tanju, or Chocobo's Birth. This is the only track to not have been composed by Ito-san. I am betting that you can guess who the composer is. No, if you can't, it was, of course, Nobuo Uematsu who composed this particular track. I told you, he's going to be in pretty much every video I make in this retrospective. Before I close out our look at Final Fantasy Adventure, I would like to give you a little piece of trivia that I myself find very interesting. It is rumored that Seiken Densetsu was going to be released in early 1987 for the Famicom disk system, which would have consisted of 5 separate discs and would have been a record-setting number of discs at that time. Though in 1987 the project was cancelled, which caused people who pre-ordered the game to be in a slight predicament, if you will. Though everyone who had pre-ordered supposedly received a letter in the mail stating that their purchase will be refunded to them, and it also suggested that they go out and get a new game that was in production and was going to be called Final Fantasy. So yes, Seiken Densetsu, Mystic Quest, and the Mana series were supposed to come before the Final Fantasy series. Final Fantasy Legend is quite possibly my favorite Final Fantasy named game for the original Game Boy. even if the age is beginning to show. Though for those interested in playing the game but don't want to play an original Game Boy release, you do have another option. In 2003, there was a remake on the Game Boy Advance titled Sword of Mana, which not only is a graphical update, but also has a dialogue and gameplay update to it as well. You have the option to not only play as the male protagonist, aka the Gladiator, but also the young lady he saves, giving a total of 2 different viewpoints behind the storyline itself. In closing, I suggest that any fans of the Mana series should take time and give this one a playthrough. I would also suggest that you play the original to get an idea of where the series truly started, though the remake is a very viable and acceptable option. Now join me next time where we will go ahead and time warp to the Super Nintendo and Final Fantasy IV. Don't worry, I'm going to be covering Final Fantasies 2 and 3. I just feel like I'm going to do this chronologically within the US releases.